Everybody, this is Ross. We're going to do an episode of Fruit Talk, so welcome to the podcast. And I just want to make sure that we are indeed live. The stream is all right. If anybody is in the chat, please let me know. You guys can hear me. Let's see here. How do I get to this again? Okay, so here's the chat. Got the chat going here. Probably should have set this up sooner. All right, we're good. So let me just change the thumbnail and we'll be good to go. I'm not sure how long this episode of Fruit Talk is going to be. Probably not all that long. What I would like to talk with you guys today, because we haven't done a video in a bit. I filmed some videos, and what had happened was I didn't have great audio on the video, so then I kind of just couldn't use those videos that came out. There were a lot about things about like uppotting and getting trees into larger containers, fruit trees into larger containers, and I thought it was pretty interesting. I did like a 40-minute long session of me just uppotting fruit trees, and you guys got to just sit there and watch me do it, and I thought it was pretty cool. I don't know, but again, the audio didn't come out great, so I had to scrap that idea. And then today's my birthday, so and yesterday I just sort of flaked on Fruit Talk. So today I want to do the episode of Fruit Talk for you guys tonight. And I thought, because we also are going to be talking about fertilizing our fig trees a bit more, so I want to talk a lot about that. Hello everybody, thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for the birthday wishes. We'll do maybe a very, very short Q&A at the end. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with you guys, unfortunately, but I do want to talk about fertilizing these fig trees, simply because, again, we're going to do a whole thing on this. We did a blog post quite recently, April 26th, figboss.com. I'll put a link in the chat here for the link to the blog post. You guys can read it as I go through this, but I've been getting a lot of questions. Also, it's been coming up a lot on our figs recently about fertilizing these things. Someone asked me today on our figs about my blog post. So I wanted to clear things up and kind of give you guys a little bit more information. Plus the information I'm going to use in this video, I can use in my book. So I think it's killing a lot of birds with one stone, and we will get this underway. So fertilizing container fig trees is very different than fertilizing your trees in the ground, I think. For me, I don't really need to fertilize my fig trees in the ground. My soil has got everything it needs for the most part, and they grow so vigorously, so quickly, that it's probably not all that necessary. Especially something like phosphorus, which is in the soil for a very long time, and there's a lot of it in the soil. I am going to be feeding all of my trees in the ground with a foliar spray of Dynagrow Protect. We're doing that all year. So I think if you guys live in some very low nutrition soils, very low fertility, do a soil test, figure out what you guys need, and then add whatever it is that you need. That's the best advice that I can give you. Now, there's a really great yeah, you're right. You're right, Chad. It's really all that simple. Any question can be answered on our figs. It's really that simple. But so a big tip here, there's just like a overall, like almost like a fact that before we begin, we should say this. To get good quality, to get good production out of your fig tree, you need to have a certain amount of nitrogen every year. The nitrogen is really what's controlling the annual shoot growth, right? The nitrogen controls the amount of leaves, right? And energy that gets put into those leaves and those new stems. All the new stems forms the fruits, right? That's the main crop. So if you don't have the right amount of nitrogen, you're going to have a less and lower productivity. In containers, if you don't feed your trees at all, you may not have any productivity. I mean, it could be very, very dire. Your tree could do almost nothing the entire year. I did that one year by accident. Totally neglected and forgot about a particular tree, and it didn't fruit for me and really didn't grow all that well at all. So while I would argue that figs don't need a whole lot of food, in containers they certainly do. And they can certainly handle a lot of food. So that's like tip number one, is we need to have the right amount of nitrogen. Now, you can't have the right amount of nitrogen without the right amount of phosphorus, because the hormones are very regulated, are really, really important, because if you don't have the right hormone balance, you're not going to succeed in getting a crop. So ideally, what you're trying to look for is the right amount of root growth and the right amount of shoot growth. And if you have that out of balance, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So you got to have some phosphorus to help aid with the root growth, right? So that's why I sort of recommend something like a 10-5-8, as it says here in the blog, or even something like a 10-4-12. You can't go wrong with potassium. I think it's probably a bit underrated. We're going to do more trials, as I mentioned in this blog post here, with the Dynagrow Protect, which is mostly potassium, but also silica. So, those are the things that I look for in a fertilizer, is probably this ratio. Is that perfect? I don't know. But what I do know is that those are some of the facts that we know, is that you need to have the right amount of nitrogen. Secondly, if you have nitrogen controlling all of this is really, really important. The hormonal balance controlling all this, really, really important. But secondly, if you have too much nitrogen, it's not a good thing. First off, you could throw your tree slightly out of hormonal imbalance or hormonal balance. Also, the big one, though, is the fruit quality. Because if you're really feeding, and I have friends that do this, and they've been growing figs for years, and I don't necessarily agree with it. You can do it. There's nothing wrong with it. But you're going to have a lower fruit quality if you feed too much, especially the nitrogen. The nitrogen creates the cracking in these fruits later in the season, as well as temperature swings. So if you have a lot of temperature swings and fluctuations in the fall when these figs are ripening, you're going to see a lot more of these cracks. Now, I've seen a lot of cracking in my fruits, and it really depends on the variety. Certain varieties have it way more than others, but I've certainly seen a lot of it in some years and a lot less of it in other years. And more importantly, I've seen it a lot less in more recent years, simply because I've stopped my feeding at a certain time of the year. So as I mentioned in the blog, I only do 4 heavy feedings. Okay. I'm trying 6 this year, and I do this once a week for the first 4 weeks of the season. You can make this number up to whatever you want, but I'll tell you this, you don't really need any sort of fertilizer after you set the fruits. Because the whole idea of feeding was to get the fruits in the first place. We're not trying to grow massive, massive trees in containers. We're not even trying to grow them in the ground. Ideally what you would want to do in just about every climate, there's some very few exceptions. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But very few exceptions where you would actually want to be growing and growing your tree, throughout the season. And the reason for that is, for a lot of us, we need to have good lignification on our branches. This is the most ideal scenario. Our tree wakes up in the start of the season. We feed it the right amount of nitrogen. It puts out as much fruit as humanly possible. And then, therefore, because it has a lot of fruit on it, it actually stops growing. And it stops growing for the rest of the season. We control our water. We control our fertilizer. To the point where the tree really is just there getting photosynthesis to then put that energy into the fruits. And that's it. At the end of the season, our tree goes dormant very naturally. We have better lignification because there's no new growth. We've stopped the water. We've stopped the nitrogen. The trees basically put out their crop, and then that's it. They're done. Now, if the opposite happened and they continue to grow, I'm going to have bad lignification. I'm going to have bad cutting quality. I'm going to have trees that are probably getting damaged from our first fall frost. I'm going to have lower fruit quality because I've been increasing my water. I've been increasing my nitrogen. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, here's the one situation where you'd want to do that is if you lived in a very warm climate. So a climate like California with a very long season to it. Arizona, South Texas, Florida, right? So in these particular places, you have a long season. And what you can do is actually do something called pinching. So what people don't seem to understand is because they refuse to do it for whatever reason, is that they think they don't need it. But if you actually pinch in a longer season climate like California, somewhere that has about 220 days or more in your season of frost-free days. If you have 220, 230 frost-free days in your season or more, I would recommend that you do something called pinching, which is going to net you essentially a first crop that's quite early. So you're going to do it just like I do. You're going to get your branches to a very vigorous, healthy state by feeding them. You're going to do some thinning. They're going to actually come out. You're going to pinch, and you're going to get a very early main crop. A lot earlier than what you would expect. And believe it or not, and people in those very warm places have a big lull between the Breba crop and the main crop. There's a big gap there. So you can fulfill the gap very easily, extending your crop season by pinching. Then what happens when you pinch is that not only do you form fruits, but you're going to form new branches. And if you continue the fertilizer after you pinch, you're then going to encourage the tree to keep growing and growing and growing. And that in your climate, in those particular climates, is a good thing, because then on that new growth, you may have from one shoot, we take off the tip off of this one shoot, it then forms 3 different shoots, or 2 or 3 different shoots from that one branch. On those 2 to 3 different shoots, you're then going to have more fruit. Therefore, increasing your productivity overall, if you just do some math, you're going to have more nodes, more leaves. Every leaf you have should be a fruit, right? So if we had one branch, we turned that now into 4 branches rather than 1, and you had a fruit on every single node, you would have a hell of a lot more fruit than if you just not pinched at all. And people don't seem to really understand that, but hopefully now they do and they can try it. But the point is that that is the one scenario where I would actually say, let's continue to feed, because on those new shoots that come out of that main shoot after we pinch, you're going to be able to get fruit and ripen that fruit. Me, if I were to get a fruit set and then pinch, and then I was going to get more growth by feeding, the fruit on that growth is not going to ripen for me. I only have 180 days of frost-free days. So what's the point? Why am I growing a larger and larger and larger and larger tree? There's absolutely no benefit except aesthetically and the fact that we're Americans and we can say we have a larger tree. There's literally no benefit. So maybe you want a larger tree and your tree's young. Okay, so that could be a situation where you'd want to do that. You want to get your tree set up right for the future. But ideally, I don't think it's really all that necessary. It's not something you want to do. There's too many negatives to the whole thing. So that's what I recommend, is in terms of the duration of your feeding, it doesn't matter how long it is. It just needs to stop after you get your fruit set. So if it's 4 weeks for me, or if it's 6 weeks for you, then it's 6 weeks for you. You have that luxury of getting additional weeks of feeding in, or days of feeding in, because maybe you live in a warmer, longer season climate. So somebody in like Memphis, as an example, may have an earlier spring than me, and they can start feeding at an earlier date, and they may actually get more shoots or longer shoots, more healthier, more vigorous shoots. My God, I'm struggling here to talk. But if you get that really nice vigor, you're going to have more fruits than me. It's just a fact. So I would say though, that doesn't necessarily matter, because usually if you're doing everything right, about 4 to 6 weeks after your trees wake up, you should see some fruit on them. You should see the beginnings of the fruits. And if you don't, then your tree is probably in some sort of hormonal imbalance. Your tree's not old enough. You're maybe feeding it too much nitrogen. There could be a whole array of different issues there. But, so that's why I recommend 4 to 6 feedings. If you live in a really warm place, you may start to see fruit 3 weeks after they wake up. So you may want to really apply the fertilizer heavily very early, and that's why I recommend it, is to start as soon as the tree wakes up. Because if you're trying to get your tree to wake up, or your tree's waking up and you're trying to get as much fruit as possible in those trees, you got to get the fertilizer going. That's just what's going to enable you exponentially. It's going to be an exponential growth of production. So that sort of solves that issue with the amount of, or the duration of the feedings and how often you're doing it. Ideally, you also just want to do, I don't even know exactly how much food I'm giving my trees, because I've never measured it out. I don't exactly know. So normally what I do is a 9-45-15. I don't like that fertilizer ratio, as I mentioned earlier in this episode. So if I've got a 10-5-8, which I do recommend, you want to go pretty heavy with that. I wouldn't even recommend just sticking with a 10-5-8. You could double that. You could triple that. And you could do that, triple or quadruple feeding or whatever it is once a week. If you're doing it every day, you want to have to dilute that to something a lot less, right? Because you're doing that every day. So if I had a guess, I would probably say I'm doing maybe like a quadruple feeding of a 9-45-15 every week. If I had a guess. So, play around with that. It's up to you guys. This is all depending on where you live, and this is just my guidelines for what I think is best for you. Now, we've also talked about, because we're on the subject of fertilizing, so I want to talk about just some other minor things in terms of fertilizing, because there's obviously some misconceptions here, but nitrogen's the biggest one that you have to stop. So I can continue the phosphorus if I wanted to, although really not all that necessary. I could also continue the potassium, which actually might be a big benefit throughout the entirety of the season. So just because I'm stopping my fertilizer doesn't mean that you have to stop your fertilizer and should stop every single nutrient. You could just stop, and you should stop your nitrogen, right? That's my recommendation. Now, you could also be feeding throughout the season micronutrients. I like to do this at the beginning of the season, even maybe slightly before the beginning of your bud break, because you can get those micronutrients applied earlier if you want, and that's all going to help with getting that really healthy growth when it comes out at the beginning of your season to then get you the most production possible, right? So if your tree needs some calcium, your tree needs some magnesium, or any other micronutrient, get that stuff on, and if it's not on, get it on right away. You want to cover all your bases. That's like the biggest tip of feeding any sort of plant. Just like us as humans, right? We want to have all of our vitamins and minerals covered. If we're missing one of the vitamins or minerals, we go deficient. It then starts causing some problems in our body, right? So that's what we want to do, is we want to cover all the micronutrients. Most of the time, your fertilizers that you're using that have NPK in it should actually have a whole spectrum of micronutrients. If not, you should go with something like green sand, ironite. I think ironite even doesn't have the best micronutrient count anymore. There's all kinds of different products. If you guys do some researching, figure out what it is that you need and apply whatever that is. A big recommendation is magnesium and calcium. So with all the micronutrients, once you cover them, getting those two, I think, is really, really important. Because if you actually do a chemical analysis, I don't know where I read this, but somewhere I read this, maybe in a study somewhere, but if I don't even know which one it is, but I know that it's either magnesium or calcium. But if you did a chemical analysis of the leaf of the fig tree, a lot of it is magnesium or calcium. So you need to have one of those two in pretty good quantities because the leaf contains a lot of it and probably needs a lot of it. I think even figs, the fruit themselves, have a pretty decent amount of it. So it's just important, I think, overall. It's been well adapted, the fig tree, over time. It seems like to magnesium heavy soils to calcium heavy soils. So that's kind of where I like to go a little bit more on the basic side of the pH scale. And if you look at a pH scale and you look at the pH availability of nutrients, you'll see over here, this particular chart is what I like to look at. And it, you know, some of these charts are a little different than others, and it's like, all right, well, which one's really the best here? But, you know, this one's from a university website. You can see that if you go too acidic, you start losing out on your magnesium and you start losing out on your calcium. So you want to be somewhere right above 7 or around 7. Now, if you go too far basic, I've done that in the past where I've applied too much lime. It's not a good idea. Now, there is a school of thought, which I've talked about before. Actually, CalMag Plus is sort of something that I'm going to be using, I think, in the future. I think it's Jack's CalMag Plus. Right? Is that the name of it? So once I actually get over this, yeah, this is it right here. This is the fertilizer that I'm going to be using, I think, in the future. Actually, I don't even think it's a 5-15-15 or 15-5-15. Now, I wish I could adjust the micronutrients slightly to what I want, but the difference is that it has the calcium and magnesium in it. I don't need to use any lime in the future. Only going to use lime if I need to bump up the pH. So, you know, there it is right there. I think talking about the pH, you could talk about it to death, but you probably want to stay around a 7. There is a school of thought, okay, that I forgot to mention in terms of grapevines, right? We've talked about this. The soil in grapes, a lot of times is either very basic or very acidic, right? There's all kinds of different nutrients, different minerals, all kinds of crazy compositions that give the wine some certain characteristics, right? So if we're thinking about fruit quality in the same way of our figs, why can't we do the same thing with our with our figs? Or what did I just say? I don't know. Think about the same thing with our grapes. We can think about the same thing with our figs, right? So, yeah, I don't know why we haven't been looking at this, and no one really has put any time into it. But I thought it could be possible that you could have some situation or scenario, even in a pot, where you'd want to have maybe the bottom layer of the pot of lime, and then the top layer and the middle layer of the pot of your regular potting mix. So I thought that could be an potentially something you'd want to try that could increase the fruit quality. Maybe it would make the acidity in our fruits a bit better. Maybe the taste of our fruits a bit better. I don't know, but it's definitely worth checking out and looking into. I thought I was going to do it this year and I ended up not. So pretty interesting how that could be something that we could look into. Now, one of the other nutrients I really think is valuable is silica. Now this is in the Dynagrow Protect, right? Because I'm doing the silica and the potassium all year, once a month, all year, all season, foliar spray. And this has got things in it that improve lignification. That's really the main reason why I'm doing it. I'm also doing it for trees that are going to be out in the cold all wintertime. And that it's supposed to improve the cold hardiness of your trees and overall increase the plant health of your trees. So I think there's a lot of internal like immune systems within the plants that the silica could really help with. And a lot of our soils really don't have it. And there's a lot of like, professors and people who study soil are really recommending it. So I think that if you put in the research, put in the time into that, you may end up being pretty convinced. And diatomaceous earth is something I used in the past. And the reason I don't use it now is just because I found out that those really small particles can affect your lungs, just like perlite. If you breathe that stuff in and it's not wet, it will be in your lungs, I guess, forever, right? So eventually, if you breathe in enough of that stuff, you don't wear a mask, and it's got to be an N95 mask or something even better, probably. These particles don't go away. You don't want to be doing that. So I decided it's not even worth the effort. Why even have to go wet the stuff down? I could just use myself a foliar spray. It's pretty easy. It's pretty simple. Also, there's some research out there that silica is just said to really need to be applied continually. It doesn't really work all that well unless it's continually available to the plant. And there is some availability issues with it, so a foliar spray seems to be the best way about going about it. So yeah, I think that's mostly it here, guys. What I want to do is actually go with you guys and do a video and go over some of the products I have and talk about some of these products, and then talk about why this is necessary. And this was a lot of in-depth information here and expanding on the blog, but I'm sure there's going to be at some point some people that just want the straight information and all that. So yeah, we'll do that, and maybe there'll be something that comes up in my mind that didn't come up in this particular episode of Fruit Talk. But I want to thank you guys here for listening, and we'll do this short Q&A, and then I'm going to go back to relaxing on my birthday here, guys. So let's see. Let's say hello to everybody. Michael, what's up? What's going on? Tarek, how you doing, buddy? Tony, how's it going? Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Joseph Hernandez, hey, how's it going? Thank you. Tarek, thank you. Chad, what's going on, man? I need to message you at some point because I want to ask you what did well for you this past season. I don't think we talked. Rose, thank you. Yeah, the frost tomorrow is going to be an absolute disaster. I have a video coming out tomorrow about it. And I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you, what's going to happen. It is looking like it's supposed to be 36 Saturday morning and then 37 Sunday morning, which is not good. Not something I want to deal with, but it's reality. Somehow it's reality. And in that video, I'm talking about kind of the simple message of why... how this could be potentially bad, because when we looked at this chart, by the way, if you guys recall, there's a chart, and I'll bring it up right now. Yeah, so it says 35 now, so it's even lower, 35. It was 36, and then, yeah, 37. So 35 and 37. Not ideal, but I'll bring up this chart here for you guys. So this is what people have been linking me, and this is I've seen this before plenty of times. I just forgot about it on the last frost that we had, and I wish I had known about it because in all honesty, it would have saved me a lot of headache. I wouldn't have had to protect a number of fruits that I did protect. But here's my issue with this: is this does not say how cold they can survive once they've already set their fruits. So it goes as far as full bloom and post bloom. That's as far as it gets. Petal fall, post bloom. Now, if I get a frost and I have some fruits that have already set on my trees, and I don't know if I have a photo here that I can show you guys. But I do have fruits on a lot of my trees that are basically, yeah, let me go back to this particular thing. Where do we get out of this? Yeah, so I have fruits that are basically pea-sized or bigger. The peaches are getting pretty big. The cherries look pretty big. I mean, the cherries are only like a month and a half away from being ripe. So if I get a frost that comes in and hits those particular fruits that are exposed, they didn't just set. They don't look like this anymore. The apricots actually didn't have their shuck. I guess that's what they call it here. They didn't even have the shuck on them anymore. And on the 17th of April, they got hit with that frost and they got wiped out. I don't have any apricots this year because of that. So, and even this is post bloom, but I'm way past this point. I am way past this point. So what are the temperatures that my trees, the fruits on the trees, can handle? So that's really what I want to find out right there. If anybody has any of that information, please let me know. But that's what's coming on up next here, guys. Tomorrow's video. Michael said, first year using Dynagrow Protect, the figs look fantastic. That's good. Yeah, Chad said that number one thing for anyone outside of Zone 9 needs a greenhouse is Game Changer. It is a game changer, for sure. And to be honest with you, a low tunnel really isn't all that expensive. It's an eyesore, but you don't need to put it up for a very long time. It's pretty nuts. I don't know why people have sort of not realized this yet. Is the stream doing all right, by the way, guys? I'm getting some red signals here on my OBS software here. Let me know if the stream's all right. The quality's all right. Let's see here. Epsom salt. Yeah, Epsom salt's another good one. All right, let's see. Joseph said, I don't pitch. I'm in 10B. My trees go semi-dormant and leaf and fruit here on their own. Chad, I'm in zone 4. If I can eat figs, anyone can. Yeah, that's true. Mr. Green says, why pay big money for Osmocote organic fertilizer as a natural time-release fertilizer? True, but will it be enough fertilizer for containers? It's also more expensive. So you need to use a lot more of it, and it's expensive. That's why I use inorganic. Michael said, using a 10-30-20 and using bone meal and oyster shells in soil now seems working well. You know, oyster shell I'd like to use. I think that'd be a really good one because it's got the calcium in it, and I think it's got magnesium as well. Ever use CalMag? Yeah, we talked about that. We already mentioned that. Joe said, greetings from Mexico, Ross. Greetings. Epsom salt's good. Again, it adds in, I think it's one of the three main, two of the three main micronutrients. So it's sulfur, magnesium, and calcium. It's two of those three. I just don't remember. But yeah, you could definitely benefit from that. And Mr. Green's right. Get yourself a soil test. And that is really the best advice anyone can give you. Brent, you can get a soil test through your local university. Like Penn State has a soil test that they offer. And I can send Penn State through the extension there. And I can send them a soil test. Mike just said he's using Silica as I suggested. Awesome, Mike. Thank you for wishing me a happy birthday. Jordan said, what do you use for container potting mix? First off, I don't use a potting mix. I use a soil conditioner, which is more well draining than a potting mix. So I use different products. Some of my research that I found, because I like to use the Just Natural soil conditioner. It's half compost, half pine bark. Again, it's really well draining. It's got a lot of air in it, and it's got a good amount of nutrients in it. It's got good structure to it. So the other products you can use is there's a lobster compost from coast of Maine, and there's also a Happy Frog soil conditioner. I would imagine one of those 3 products is local to you. It's probably the best stuff you can find for container fruit trees of any kind. Tony said, "Love your talks, Ross. Friends with Stephen Biggs." Awesome. I would love to talk with Stephen again. It was nice being on his radio show, that's for sure. Joe said, "Your birthday, happy birthday. If you were in Mexico, we'd make a chicken and mole sauce with handmade tortillas. Feliz cumpleaños, Ross." Awesome. Yeah, I actually had some handmade flour tortillas the other night, and they came out wonderful. But I've never actually had the mole sauce. You know, I hear it's really good. Michael said, "Giving up on peaches with these temps." Yeah, you may have to. Especially north of me, man. It's really bad. I feel bad for us. You know, it's kind of like a kick in the shin. It's like a kick when you're down. You're already down, and the weather's kicking us, you know. Tony said, "It's very cold here in Canada, wrapping trees in burlap." Yeah. Steven Tischler, what's going on? "It's possible to overwinter potted figs outside and exposed to the elements in single-digit temps by just wrapping them up at a bunch of layers." I don't know, but I definitely know it is possible to overwinter potted figs outside if the temperatures stay above 14 degrees Fahrenheit. However, you need to have really good lignification. Really good lignification, because you need to protect not just the roots. The 14 degrees is for the roots, but if you have good lignification and a hardier variety, you may have a tree that will be able to survive no problem 14 degrees. It may even survive 5 degrees. So ideally, it's tough, but you can do it. People in Europe that live in very mild climates in the wintertime, they do it all the time. Michael Jones said, "Tarps and sheets, my yard looks like a junkyard." Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? All right. Well, guys, I'm going to get on out of here in just a second. If anyone has anything left that they would like to say. Christopher said, "Have you ever lost an in-ground fig tree?" I have never lost one to the cold. I've pulled some out, but they were alive. And if you just be patient with your in-ground figs, they'll come back, man. They are so resilient. It's insane. Now, I did this year plant a ton of very young fig trees in the ground. This was last spring. So those very young trees may not have enough root mass and number of nodes underneath the soil. So if the top got killed back, they need to come back from something lower underneath the soil. And it's very possible this year that I've lost a number of trees because they're not going to come back from a lower point below the soil. But you know what? Be patient. They're insanely resilient. It's incredible. All right. What's going on? Mr. Scott. I don't know if that's your name or if this is a reference or something, but he said, "Hey, Ross, are you doing strawberries again this year?" Of course, every year. They're one of the most reliable things I grow, and I will never eat a store-bought strawberry again. In fact, they're so reliable that I can't imagine ever not having just tons and tons of strawberries. Why anybody would ever buy any strawberries blows my mind. So yeah, of course I'm doing strawberries, and I'm trying a number of different varieties as well. We have the Rutgers Scarlet, I have the Mar de Bois, I have the Early Glow, and I think there's even one more that I may have added, or I thought about adding it. I'll have to think about remembering the name, but it's the Purple Wonder Strawberry, I think, from Burpee. Purple Wonder Strawberry. Yeah, that's it. So this one's propagating in my yard. It's purple. It's from Cornell. Because it's purple, it may have some different flavor. Yeah, it says here, a color and flavor breakthrough. So I should get quite an interesting strawberry here out of this one. And I should have some fruit off of mine this year. We'll get to taste it. You never know. They're not always the most reliable fruits when they're young. So, at least the most representative fruits, I should say. But my Purple Wonder plant is propagating itself, and it is a pretty strong, healthy plant. At least the one plant that I got from Burpee, because it's a shame they only send you one plant, and that's the best you can do. Because a lot of these other places, like Indiana Berry, if you go on their website here, they'll send you 25 plants in a bundle, and it'll cost you the same price. So like, here we go. Actually, not the same price, but pretty comparable. 25 plants for $20, you know, and that's across the board with all of these. Look at this, 1,000 of them, and they're 16 cents each. I mean, they really do grow like crazy, that if you just get yourself about 50 of them and plant 50, you will have an insanely big strawberry patch the following year. And you'll be swimming in them in no time. One of these sells the Mar de Bois strawberry. I think it might be... it's not Indiana Berry. What's the other company that I recommend for berry plants? It's escaping me. Homegrown organic strawberries are the bomb. When I was 5, we had an elderly lady for a neighbor, and those berries, she grew the best. They were. I'm sure they were. I have no doubts. They're so easy to grow, too. It's a joke. I mean, at least here, you plant them, and you don't even have to worry about them. You don't do anything. You don't cover them. You literally plant them and get free food for like the rest of your life. It's that easy. It's that stupid. Here in this climate, it's a joke. You could almost, if you really wanted to, not even do any sort of maintenance if you really wanted to. Asparagus is probably a similar thing there. You know, a lot of perennials, you could just have them for a very long time. The strawberry you'll have literally forever because it just keeps propagating itself. Michael said, I was disappointed with my strawberry harvest, then I found out my son's friends are eating my strawberries when I'm not around. All right. We need to get you a camera or something. Yeah, they're that good. Anyway, guys, I think I'm gonna go. But Mr. Scott said second year growing alpine strawberries. Yeah, that's another one that I am trying as well. There's a couple of different varieties of the alpines that I'm growing, and those are very interesting. They're very, very good. They're definitely better, but they're pretty comparable to Mar de Bois, I think. You get a really well ripened Mar de Bois. It's pretty close. It's not pretty. I don't want to say it's close, but it's the closest thing I've ever come across to. So, and the fruits are big, which is, you know, a big difference between an alpine and a Mar de Bois strawberry. Is that after a couple of years, the Mar de Bois will actually be big, and yeah, they're almost just as good. Alrighty, guys. Thank you here for listening to this one. We'll talk to everybody soon, and see you guys for tomorrow's video on the frost that we're talking about. If somebody has any info on the frost that I was mentioning, you know, if indeed a frost hits my bare fruits that have set and they're getting larger, what would happen? And that's kind of the big thing I want to find out. I was looking on the internet, couldn't find the answer. I don't know why. So maybe someone has some experience. But yeah, guys, we'll talk to everybody soon, all right? Take care. Stay safe out there. Peace.